Hey Wargamers, today we got a preview from Warhammer community that a lot of people have been waiting for, and that is the one that finally addresses the question, what about Kroot? So if you're a fan of Kroot, today is a very good day for you. We have some awesome news and a great look at what Kroot will look like in the new Tau Empire Codex, which is coming up very soon. And to get ready for that new codex, you might be like me and be magnetizing a bunch of new models right now. And if you are, you might want to head on over to my new sponsor, the Magnet Baron, and use code Invasive22 for 10% off all your magnet needs. Again, that's themagnetbaron.com, and they have tons of magnets, whatever you need to build your suits just the way you want them. Use that code Invasive22 and you'll get 10% off. All right, let's talk about Kroot. There are a couple big changes just to how you actually bring Kroot in your army that will make bringing Kroot much easier. One of those changes is that Kroot Shapers are now HQ units, which is pretty darn cool. Makes a lot of sense that something that might lead an entire unit of its brethren might be an HQ unit as opposed to, I don't know, an elite slot choice like it has been in the past. So Kroot Shapers are now HQs, which means that you can bring an all-Kroot army if you so choose. You can bring your Shaper as your HQ, bring some Carnivores as your troops, and then fill out the rest of your army with the other slots. Great. Awesome. That is super cool. It also means that Shapers have access to their own Warlord Traits, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and there's some cool implications about what that means for your army design in general. The other change is probably more general, something that might be a little bit more useful for a broader audience, and that is that Carnivores unlock slots for the other Kroot unit types. So even if you don't want to bring a full army of Kroot, you can still bring a good amount of Kroot without hindering your ability to bring other types of units. That's made possible by this new rule Kroot pack. It says, if your army is Battleforged, then for each Kroot Carnivores unit included in a detachment, up to one Krootox Riders unit, up to one Kroot Hound unit, and up to one Kroot Shaper unit can be included in that detachment without taking up battlefield role slots, which massively reduces the competition for those slots by mainline Tau units against Kroot. One of the biggest barriers to bringing Kroot in the past has been that they have had to compete with other Tau units for those battlefield role slots. And when we're talking about trying to get Kroot Hounds into fast attack slots where they have to compete with drones in the past or Pathfinders, or trying to get Shapers into elite slot in the past where they've had to compete with basically all the battle suits, that is a really hard sell. Kroot Pack allows you to totally avoid that, or at least avoid it to an extent that you want, in a way that now I don't have to choose between Pathfinders or Kroot Hounds based on the battlefield role position, but instead I just have to make that decision based on the points that I have and how I want to build my army. So now you can bring those Hounds and not worry about not being able to bring Pathfinders, not being able to bring drones, not being able to bring Vespid. You can bring that Shaper and not have to worry about how many commanders you can bring or Fireblade or Ethereal, right? It's a non-issue now, and that's awesome. That means that you can really build your army the way you want to, in a way that's thematic, and could also make for some really interesting combinations and strategic choices when you're on the tabletop. This means that this change away from having Kroot units just be part of the force organization chart and really kind of their own thing is great for everyone. It's awesome for people that love Kroot. If you're a Kroot fan, this is huge news. But if you're just looking to build a functional Tau army, this is also good news because it allows you to build more dynamically. So of course, being able to bring Kroot more easily is a good thing. However, what makes this really an influential thing is that Kroot themselves have improved. Right, being able to bring a suboptimal unit more easily might not actually make a difference to you if you're not going to bring them in the first place, but Kroot have improved in a way that you may want to do that now. So there's a few things that have changed about them. One is that they are strength 4 natively. It used to be that they were strength 3 and the rifle added +1 strength, so it ended up being 4 in close combat, but now they're just strength 4 all the time. It doesn't make a difference for that melee interaction, but there might be other rules that trigger off the strength characteristic that will be influenced by this. It's also just a little bit more streamlined that way too. On top of that, we have significantly improved output by a couple different things. One is that their attack profile is now 2 instead of just 1. So right there you have having a doubling of output on Kroot. And then their AP -1 now from their rifle, which means that they can pack a punch, right? we're pushing the limits here of what a pretty cheap unit can do in terms of having 2 attacks, strength 4, -1 AP in close combat is not a bad deal at all. And yes, this kind of keeps pace with the AP creep we've been seeing, right? If you may have noticed a trend of AP just kind of getting dialed up a little bit across the board. And so yes, this looks good, it sounds good compared to the old version, but it may not actually be as influential as we may first perceive it to be if everything gets a similar boost, right? If everything is getting a boost in a way that this actually kind of comes out in the wash, then maybe that's not as exciting, but at least for now, we can be excited about it. I think this is a really nice change and one that makes them have the output that you might want to see on Kroot given their role within the Tau army. There's also a leak that suggests that there's a relic that can add an attack to Kroot for a turn. And so, you could dial this up even more. You could have 3 attacks instead of 2 attacks on your Kroot, which would make their value even more. So we're looking at Kroot being able to dish out a fair amount of shots, or at least a fair number of hits in close combat, which is nice. We also see that Kroot in general, not just Kroot carnivores, but Kroot hounds, Kroot ox, Kroot shapers, all get a pregame movement now. This used to be restricted just to the carnivores, but now your hounds and your Kroot ox riders can come along with you, which is massive because of those benefits that we're getting from the shaper. It means everybody can stay together, everybody can work as a team, everybody can be a happy little kindred, and they can synergize in a way that they wouldn't be able to do quite as easily in the past. So now your Kroot hounds can come along with you and perform the role that you might expect Kroot hounds to perform on the tabletop, as opposed to, hanging back in the background and then running up later. No, they're just hanging out with their masters, the Kroot carnivores, and, doing the things that you want them to do. So that is a huge change that actually has some pretty significant consequences in terms of Kroot in general being able to compete for objectives, right? If you're able to get up on the board a little bit more easily with a larger number of units, you're going to have more pressure on those objectives, especially if we're talking about those Kroot hounds that are now going to be even in a better position to go and, chew some guy's leg off because they're that much closer to the objective and they can offer that extra pressure because of that. Or your Kroot ox riders now can get a shooting angle on something with their Kroot guns, or again, be closer to use those massive Kroot gorilla fists in close combat. So that's a really important thing. It also means they just generally have better charging and shooting perspectives and are more effective at screening, right? You can have them up board in a way that's going to provide a speed bump or a tar pit for an opponent force more easily than if they were having to start in your deployment zone. So we see improved value across the board of Kroot because of this one change alone. And it really makes me think that Dalith Kroot, particularly if you are selecting the Mon-Ka tactical philosophy, could be an impressive army build, right? If you're building an army that's not just exclusively Kroot, but has a large component of Kroot in it, and you're using Dalith, which gives them the tactical philosophy benefit, you could have Mon-Ka Kroot kind of, tearing things up in the first couple turns of a game. And I really am curious to see if this comes to fruition and is a viable build for a competitive scene, because it sounds like it might be, just because of how much you can do with these relatively cheap units. The effectiveness of all your Kroot units are going to be enhanced by those potential warlord traits that you can give the shaper. And we had one of those previewed for us in the Warhammer community article today, being Pack Leader. Pack Leader says, while a friendly Kroot unit is within 6 inches of this warlord, each time you make a charge roll for that unit, roll 1 additional d6 and discard 1 of the dice. So basically, you roll 3 dice, you pick the 2 you want. So that means that you have a better chance of making a successful charge. And of course, if you're a melee-focused unit, that's a good thing. It means that you're going to be able to use Kroot both in a better defensive way and also in a better offensive way, right? You're going to be in a better position and more likely able to tar pit a unit at longer range than you would be otherwise. So if you have those Kroot upboard after your initial movement, they are able to charge more effectively and lock someone up in their deployment zone maybe, which is going to be really effective in terms of keeping them away from the rest of your army. But you can also use that offensively. If you bring the whole kindred, they can go and take down an objective or whatever. So obvious benefits here of being able to charge better for Kroot. We also have leaks about 2 other Warlord traits. One of those traits is that Kroot nearby the Shaper can ignore light cover against targets within 12 inches, and this is thematic. It fits with Kroot being predators, being able to pick out targets amongst dense foliage and stuff like that. It's kind of like their old fieldcraft abilities or their old ability to be a sniper. So this is cool. I like it. It's certainly a valuable thing, and it is a source of ignoring cover, which is now less easily accessible in the Codex. It used to be that you could get ignore cover pretty easily in the Tau Codex, and it's still fairly abundant if you want it and if you make that choice ahead of time. But the fact that marker lights no longer provide ignoring cover means that it's much scarcer in this new army compared to the old one. And so having a source of ignore cover amongst a troop unit like Kroot is pretty useful, and something that is a welcome addition to the complexity that we're seeing built in the Kroot line here. The second Warlord trait that we've seen in the leaks is one that allows Kroot nearby the Shaper to count as remaining stationary as long as they haven't fallen back. So if they do a normal move or advance, they count as remaining stationary, and that is pretty darn useful. I think this is a pretty strong Warlord trait here. It offsets the fact that Kroot don't normally benefit from tactical philosophies, so they don't benefit from Maka, for example, which would otherwise allow them to move and shoot without penalty. This gives them that ability for the duration of the game as long as they're next to that Shaper, which is pretty darn useful. It means that you can advance and shoot. You can advance and shoot your Kroot rifles. You can advance and shoot your Kroot gun. And so that gives them even more benefit. And so any of these are probably going to be good options if you're bringing a lot of Kroot units. Of course, right? If you're not bringing a lot of Kroot units, you probably don't want to invest in a Warlord trait that's focused on Kroot. But if you are, it's still probably not something that you would necessarily want to prioritize as your main Warlord trait or take multiple of, but instead I would probably use a stratagem to unlock a second Warlord and give your second Warlord trait to a Shaper, right? And then pick one of these. Or if you're bringing an all Kroot army, maybe you do want to take multiple Shapers and have multiple Warlord traits so you get all these benefits. And if you do that, you can make a spicy little Kroot ball there, right? If you have all these abilities on top of each other, that's not bad either. So, right, there's lots of options here, and the extent that you want to invest in them is going to be completely proportional to your investment in Kroot in general, which is nice and thematic. It again reinforces that ability to bring Kroot in an army in a way that's consistent with your design philosophy, but also one that allows a diversity of builds. So I'm excited for that. I think this is a really nice change, and the introduction of Shaper Warlord traits really does feel thematic. It's somewhat similar to some of the ideas we had talked about a few months ago now, looking at ways that Shapers could shape their kindred. And I think these are really elegant ways of doing that without introducing an additional kind of bloated mechanic, and just having the Warlord trait there is a really streamlined way of doing it. So a nice change from Games Workshop here. And on the subject of theme, one of the things about Kroot is that they, again, are carnivores, and they are voracious eaters. They are pretty darn aggressive when it comes to their dinner table habits. And so that's something that in the lore is really off-putting to the Tau, and they just kind of tolerate it because the Kroot are useful to them. But we see this manifested here in this new stratagem called the Grizzly Feast, which is 1 CP. It says, use this stratagem in the fight phase when an enemy unit is destroyed by an attack made by a model in a Kroot unit from your army. Until the end of the battle, each time a model in that Kroot unit would lose a wound, roll a d6 on a 5-up. That wound is not lost. So if a Kroot unit kills something, they get a 5-up feel no pain if you use this stratagem, which is a pretty good buff to survivability. Again, it's thematic. You can imagine, a bunch of Kroots crowded around a unit of Space Marines, tearing out organs and chowing down, and they're getting stronger by that consumption. And that's, again, part of the lore for Kroot. So it's thematic, and I love the name, the Grizzly Feast. It provides a reliable save for them, right? Normally they just have a 6-up save. Giving them a 5-up feel no pain is not bad. It's a pretty good save, right? Like they get their armor save maybe, but they're almost always going to get that feel no pain save. So that is a really good way to make, again, a cheap unit more survivable. Its use is fairly limited, though, because, of course, it is a stratagem. So that means you can only use it once per phase, and because it only applies to one unit, that means that you're only able to affect one Kroot unit per phase. Now, it could be your fight phase and your opponent's fight phase, of course. It doesn't restrict it just to your fight phase, so that's good. But it does restrict the number of units that could actually benefit from this, especially if you're bringing a big ball of Kroot and you have multiple units crowded around a single target. You have to pick a favorite. You have to pick one that you're going to use this on. You can't use it on all of them. And so you're going to prioritize those larger units, probably your Kroot carnivores, and the other units are not going to benefit from it in the same way. So you're not going to probably see Kroot hounds with a 5-up feel no pain or Kroot ox riders with a 5-up feel no pain. You're going to want to invest in those larger wound pool units like the carnivores themselves. And so I really would have liked this to have an option to upgrade to multiple units because of that grouped-based approach that you will generally see with Kroot. So it would have made sense to me for there to be like an upgrade mechanic here where, if you're applying it just to one unit, then it's 1 CP, but you could do up to 3 units for 2 CP. Again, not much point here talking about it anymore, but it would have been nice to see something like that in this, because Kroot do want to kind of stick together. And so you're going to have many different units around a single target. And so it makes sense that they all benefit from this, right? That they all are taking part of this Grizzly Feast, and it's not just one unit that gets the benefit. So you're going to want to use this as often as possible if you're using Kroot, right? 1 CP is not a bad price to pay, I think, for 5-up feel no pain on a block of 20 guys, for example. So that would be something that you'd want to prioritize because you're only going to be able to use it once per phase. Of course, you need to destroy a unit first, and so you're not going to be able to use it probably turn 1, but you're going to do some planning. You're going to do some planning and some coordination between your shooting and your close combat in a way that maybe you leave just a couple of guys left in that unit, and then you charge them with Kroot, and then boom, you can get that benefit for a low cost. Because again, you want to preserve your Kroot until they can get this benefit, and then once they get it, then they're more resilient and are going to be able to hold up against some enemy fire in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be able to. So there's going to be a little bit of coordination required in order to maximize the benefit here, but it's totally doable if you use the right guns in the right place at the right time. All right, and that was Games Workshop's preview of what Kroot are going to look like in the new Codex. I think it looks really good. I'm excited to see how Kroot function in relation to the rest of the army, because this looks like it could be viable as at least a portion of a pretty strong build. So maybe you'll see all Kroot armies, maybe you won't, but at least the inclusion of Kroot in some builds seems likely. And this is just another sign of this book appearing to have multiple viable builds, right? It seems like there's a lot of underappreciated units or strategies in the past that are now getting a bit more attention and a bit more of a leg up than they have been. So I'm excited to see what this new Codex brings as a whole, especially excited for our redheaded stepchildren, the Kroot, to get some table time, because this looks cool, and at the very least it's thematic and just plain old fun. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you excited about this, or does it not really do anything for you? Let's have that discussion, and of course, thanks for watching, and as always, happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. A while ago I made my own miniature. If you are interested in showing your support for the channel on the tabletop, you can pick one up either on Etsy if you're in the US, or directly through me worldwide. Special thanks to our sponsor, the Magnet Baron, and also all the good folks over on Patreon, especially Mate Monk, Marcy, A Little Pink Monster, Benaby Jones, Durza, Ever Keller, Robbie Goodwin, Jose Gomez, Ruger, Drew Pratley, Michael Byrne, Zealous Brimstone, Scott Heater, Stephen Cowan, Jared Egler, Chris Kessler, Tao Oswald, and Shifty.